Well, opposites attract. And I'm not saying that facetiously, but there are some people who have been so propagandized by the system that they are irretrievable until they lose. And then they'll say, gee, I should have listened. And, it takes a certain type of personality and intellect that can think outside the box being the accepted norm, to find these things out. You obviously have. And he just doesn't want to accept that. There's a lot of things that go on within families and even within friends that don't work out too well, and that is, well, how can she know that and I don't? Or why does she believe that and I don't? And so on. There's not very much you can do about it. You got to try to get a good portion of your assets in gold and silver-related assets, and I'm very strong on that.
Isn't it too late for that?
Else to go.
Well, let me ask you though. I mean, I would really understand like 3 years ago getting into gold, but gold has got to be not peaking yet, but it's going to get close to peaking at some point. No?
No, I disagree.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. If you just go back to 1980 and you measure official inflation and you look at the price of gold, gold should be selling at $2,700 an ounce. It's as simple as that. And if you take real inflation, you get a much higher figure. And so the United States government has consciously, along with other central banks, deliberately suppressed the price of gold, and as a secondary option, they push down the price of silver as well because they usually run together. And this has been an ongoing program. So gold is very, very underpriced. In fact, you might say you're stealing it by buying it at these prices. And that's very, very important because we're in a market that is unreal in the relationship to what gold is really worth. And where do I think it's going? It certainly is going to $2,700 an ounce. And as I said earlier in the program, J.P. Morgan thinks that it's going to go to $2,000 an ounce. Goldman Sachs believes it's going to $2,000 an ounce, and others believe it's going to $2,500 an ounce. And these people are not pro-gold.
Right.
And so that would be stage 2 of the bull market. The first stage lasted almost 10 years. The next stage could last another 10 years or longer. We may see prices much higher depending upon what happens in the world economy.
Marco is in San Diego with a question for Bob Chapman, international forecaster. Marco?
Hi, Bob. How are you this evening? You know what? Thank you for offering this service, and the same for you. Question I have is, because my family grew up in Argentina, and at one time there was a 1-to-1 ratio with the peso and the dollar, and that was uncoupled, and then the peso went to 4-to-1, and we saw our family's wealth decrease because we weren't able to get that money out of our country. The question I have for you is specific. If an individual wanted to figure out how to ride out this depression and maybe protect themselves, what options would they have vis-a-vis, say, Canada, or relocating to, Europe, Spain, or certain South American countries?
Is there a better country somewhere for you, Marco? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because we're looking at Canada or Spain, and those are our two options, as well as, back home to Argentina.
Okay. Well, I hope Marco, I hope part of you always considers the United States home. I mean, I hope the United States has been good to you at least a little bit, that you are, I hope, torn a little bit about abandoning it. But here we're talking to Bob, who spends most of his time in South America. So go ahead, Bob.
Well, Canada will suffer least or less than the United States in the Depression, natural resources, and probably a better-run government. As far as Spain is concerned, they're having terrible financial problems. They and Ireland are both in the Eurozone, and one interest rate that's fit all within the zone, I said many years ago, would bring it down, and this is a good example. Spain's a lovely place to live. Canada's a little cold for me, although it can get pretty nasty in the winter in Madrid. But I think there are places, and you mentioned Argentina, where your family had the problems with the freezing of assets. They couldn't make it over the river fast enough. But Montevideo is an alternative, and it's a very nice city, and they're relatively stable government, and also places like Panama and Costa Rica, Mexico are alternatives, as well as New Zealand and Australia. So there are places to go for people who would like to shelter their wealth in rather than the United States, because the United States and Western Europe are going to feel the brunt of what's going on. Not that anybody's going to escape. Everybody's going to suffer. But moving, you've got a number of alternatives. I would think in Spain, when the Depression bottoms out, there would be some wonderful buys if you can keep your assets intact. And as you heard me earlier, I'm a big proponent of gold and silver coins and shares. I think that's the ultimate place to be for wealth preservation today.
Carlos is in Carson on Coast to Coast AM. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chapman. Looking at some of the economic trends here the last 30 years, I cannot help to think that the whole stage for this economic blow-up was started back in the 1980s. You had Ronald Reagan issue the Monetary Control Act of 1980, which started deregulating markets across the world. The International Monetary Fund went out there and through the loans to third world countries forced them to open up their markets for foreign investment, while at the same time the banks started relaxing standards so that the money was started flowing out to include the marginal members of society. So there was an expansion of money through the 1980s and 1990s, and of course standards were relaxed. And then in 1999 you had the removal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which removed the restrictions from investment in commercial banks to unify and do business, paving the way for the derivatives.
All right.
That are third. So my question is, to me, all these pieces fell neatly together. It appears to me there was a huge conspiracy to lead to a one-world economic system.
Where are you with that, Bob?
Well, he's absolutely correct. And they had a chance, a good chance, to rectify this if they really wanted to between 1989 and 1992, and they just simply refused to do so. They wanted the game to play on. And all of the things that the gentleman talked about are true, especially the termination of the Glass-Steagall Act, which took down the barrier between you might call it a Chinese wall, as it's called on Wall Street, or was at the time, between banking and the brokerage business. And that's really what opened this whole thing up. And I think the name of the act that did that was the Graham-Bly-Level or something like that. But the point is, he's absolutely right. And, what was the intention? The intention was to keep the volition going toward a time when the people who control things from behind the scenes could set up a scenario where they would force the inhabitants, particularly of the United States, Europe, and Canada, through economic and financial decline, to accept world government. And this is, I think, what this is all about. All right. This just didn't happen, believe me.
All right. We're probably running out of time here, but I do want to just tell everybody, hang on. We'll get to your questions. We'll get to your comments. And we're talking with Bob Chapman, the international forecaster. I don't think we ever got back to the comment you were making just before we went to the top of the hour break, so I don't want to forget that. And then also, I want you to address a couple of the items that are up on your webpage. If people want to link up to that, they can at coasttocoastam.com. While you're there, take a look at all the news stories for the day. The Rorschach ink blot demystified, great story, too, along with cool links on the blog at coasttocoastam.com. This is Ian Punnett.